but I do think in this situation it can be a wise choice. Look into your zoning code and see if there might be problems. If you have deed restrictions, if you have a conservation easement on your farm, definitely check and see that your vision for farm events and festivals is going to be consistent with that. If farm events are something that you really do a lot of, I do have a webinar. My next one coming up is on all that. Food safety liability. That's really the heading that this slide should say. It should say food safety insurance. What happens if your product makes somebody sick? You know, I've been talking about insurance all this time, and we haven't mentioned a little bit about Food Safety Modernization Act, but I haven't discussed the true nature of food safety liability. And that's because this is a very tricky, quickly evolving world. You know, the spinach scares, the melon, these are still very new in the legal world, and there aren't necessarily clear answers on how to address these risks. If your product makes someone sick, you're exposed to liability from many different avenues. First, I mean, just the fact that that person is sick, you can end up responsible for their medical bills, even if you didn't necessarily do something negligent, which is a legal term for whether you did something wrong. There can be fines associated with legal or regulatory violations from selling contaminated food, even if you didn't know it was contaminated, because of course you didn't, or you wouldn't have put it out the door. Then there's the expenses of a recall, and the government's authority to compel a recall has expanded, so this can happen. Your farm liability policy may cover some of these things, such as if someone gets sick, but the fines and the expenses of a recall may not be covered. And to be honest, I'm not convinced that farm liability really will cover you if someone gets sick. I think a insurance company could try to squirm out of that one because the language in the policies is really not that clear. So you might be exposed to liability for really all of these things under farm liability. CGL and products liability policies expand your coverage for these things, and again, cover your defense. But if you ask for a quote on a products liability policy for your CSA, I highly doubt you'll have a pleasant surprise when that quote comes in. The things I've seen are just ridiculously high, and it's not feasible to really try to insure all of your risks in this area. The insurance industry doesn't really have a handle yet on what the exposure is for a direct-to-consumer farm. And when that happens, when they aren't sure where risk is at, they overcompensate and they charge really high fees because they just, you know, they got to cover their bases. So it's another area where I don't have a clear answer for you, and I am busy trying to find insurance companies that can offer competitive prices for these things. But for the moment, when it comes to food safety, there isn't a good answer. Again, if you talk with your agent, try to get it in writing what his or her impressions are of the coverage that you have. And if full product liability is important to you, ask around. Try to get quotes from a number of insurance companies. Okay, I have a resource that I prepared that goes through a